Picture this. It's the summer of 1974, and on the beautiful Mediterranean island of Cyprus, a crisis is about to explode. This wasn't just any conflict. It was an event that would literally fracture a nation, drawing a line in the sand that remains etched onto the map to this very day. At its core, this whole story is about one single island, a strategic jewel in the Mediterranean that was, for all intents and purposes, permanently split in two. It became a lasting symbol of a conflict that still echoes today. So how on earth did this happen? How did one summer of violence create a division that has lasted for decades? Well, we're going to trace that exact chain of events, from old tensions that were simmering for years to a full-blown military invasion, to really understand how one of the world's most difficult frozen conflicts was born. To really get what happened in '74, we have to rewind the clock a lot. See, this story doesn't just begin with tanks and paratroopers. It begins with centuries of history and the deep, deep divisions between the island's two main communities. Cyprus has always been this prize. Its location is so strategic that a long line of empires, from the Ottomans to the British, wanted to control it. But then, in 1960, after a long, hard struggle, Cyprus finally got its independence. But this wasn't the happy ending you might expect. No, this was the beginning of a brand new, really turbulent chapter.
The thing is, independence didn't magically create a unified Cypriot identity. Not even close. Instead, it brought two totally competing national dreams into a direct collision course, each with a radically different idea for what the island's future should be.
And this ideological gap, this chasm, really defined the entire conflict. On one side, you had enosis. This was the dream of the majority Greek Cypriot community to unite the island with Greece. On the other side, you had taksim, the Turkish Cypriot goal, which was to partition the island because they were deeply afraid of being oppressed in a Greek-run state. And these weren't just casual political ideas, they were deeply held national dreams. So they tried to stitch this all together with the 1960 constitution. It was this incredibly complex power-sharing deal. You'd have a Greek Cypriot president, but a Turkish Cypriot vice president who had full veto power. And get this, the UK, Greece, and Turkey were named guarantor powers, which basically gave them the right to intervene to protect the new government. The problem was a lot of Greek Cypriots felt this whole setup gave way too much power to the Turkish minority, and the whole thing started to feel very fragile very quickly. And fragile it was. By 1963, the political gridlock just exploded into widespread violence between the two communities. It was brutal. Over 360 Turkish Cypriots and 170 Greek Cypriots were killed, and more than 25,000 Turkish Cypriots were forced to flee their homes. It was a horrifying preview of what was still to come. So now, let's jump forward to July 1974. That simmering conflict, it's about to boil over and explode. And the spark wasn't a riot or a political squabble. It was a full-on military coup. Okay, so here's a crucial piece of context. At this time, Greece itself was being run by a military junta, a dictatorship, that was a huge supporter of enosis. They decided to back a coup in Cyprus, using the Cypriot National Guard to overthrow the island's president, Archbishop Makarios. And in his place, they installed Nikos Samson, a known hardline nationalist with a very public anti-Turkish history. For Turkey, this was an absolute red line. They saw a Greek takeover of the island as a direct, imminent threat to the Turkish Cypriot people. They immediately issued a list of demands: get Samson out, pull the Greek officers, and protect Turkish Cypriot rights. When Britain, another one of the guarantor powers, decided not to intervene with its military, Turkey started preparing its own invasion. With all diplomatic options pretty much off the table, Turkey launched what it called the Cyprus Peace Operation. Most of the world, though, knows it as Operation Attila. And this wasn't just a single event. It was a very carefully planned two-phase military campaign. So before the invasion started, the Greek Cypriot and mainland Greek forces on the island had more troops, and crucially, they had tanks. The Turkish Cypriot forces were mostly isolated in small communities. But this balance of power was about to change big time. On July 20th, the first phase, Attila I, began. Turkish forces landed on the northern coast near the city of Kyrenia. The initial goal here wasn't total conquest. It was to secure a foothold on the beach and connect with the big Turkish Cypriot community in Nicosia. It was a show of force, hoping to push for a diplomatic solution. And that initial invasion had a massive, almost immediate political consequence. The military junta back in Athens, the very government that kicked this whole crisis off, completely crumbled under the pressure.
It collapsed just 3 days after the invasion began, which actually paved the way for democracy to return to Greece.
But even with the new government in Greece, peace talks in Geneva just stalled out. Turkey proposed its plan for a federal state, but when the Cypriot delegation asked for more time to think it over, Turkey demanded an answer right then and there. When an answer didn't come, it launched the second phase of its invasion, Attila II, on August 14th. Now, the aftermath of Attila II was decisive. This was a much bigger offensive. We're talking tens of thousands of troops and hundreds of tanks just rolling across the island. By the time a ceasefire finally took hold, a brand new and brutal reality had been carved across Cyprus. And the result of all that fighting was the creation of the Green Line. It's a buffer zone controlled by the United Nations that cuts right across the entire island. It's a physical scar, separating the two communities and turning a political division into a reality of concrete and barbed wire. The human cost was just staggering. The war created this massive refugee crisis. Around 160,000 Greek Cypriots either fled or were expelled from the north. At the same time, tens of thousands of Turkish Cypriots moved from the south into that new Turkish-controlled area. I mean, a huge part of the island's population was suddenly displaced from their homes. And the military outcome was clear. When all the dust had settled, the Turkish military controlled nearly 40% of the island's territory, mostly in the north. And that land included major economic centers and a lot of fertile farmland. This de facto military division was later given a political name, the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. But here's the catch. This new state has never, ever gained international acceptance. To this day, Turkey is the only country in the world that recognizes it. And that leaves us with the situation we still have today. Cyprus remains a divided island. Despite so many attempts at reunification, the Green Line endures. It's a stark, constant reminder of that one fateful summer in 1974. And it poses a question that still doesn't have an answer. Can a line drawn by conflict ever truly be erased?